All right, welcome to another coffee break. This is November 2023, getting to the holidays. And coffee break, 5 things you should know, types of investments that could possibly show up in your 401k. And so grab your cup, and hopefully it's got coffee or tea. Mine has tea in it today. And let's get started talking about some investments that you could see in your 401k and get you a little bit more education so that you know how to choose which investments work best for you and what you're trying to accomplish. So before we get started, we want to go through what coffee break is. So coffee break is made for 401k participants. It is so if you are participating in your 401k or able to, this is kind of for you. This is basically for you to get some ideas of how to put some planning stuff in place for your financial future. We know you don't get a lot of access to financial professionals, and we're here to help with that. And basically, it's short and sweet, 15 minutes, so basically long enough to have a cup of coffee. And I usually try to go a little shorter than that, so we'll see. And this is just to cover highlights. So, if you want specific information of how to do this for yourself, we can always set up a no obligation complimentary conversation, and you'll see more details on how to do that at the end of the presentation. So, who am I? Who are we? What is One Vision? One Vision is myself, Lisa Sky, and my coworker, or I guess, used to be coworker, now co-founder of One Vision Retirement, Chris. And we've been in the industry a long time, as you can see. I work a lot on the personal side. I work a lot with women who are wanting to retire a little earlier, maybe 55 or so, and typically they're child free. And so they have some other considerations in mind, but I do personal planning for a lot of other people as well, but that's how I specialize. And Chris works a lot with your bosses, with employers, and helping put these plans in place. So he's a great resource for how to utilize these plans to get the best out of them for you. All right, so let's get started with the index fund. Index funds are in your 401k most of the time. You might see them. Vanguard has a lot of index funds, and they are in a lot of 401ks. We're choosing just to look at the S&P 500 as an example of what an index fund is. It's basically the S&P 500 is 500 of the largest U.S. stocks in the country, and basically they put them all together, and basically the fund companies take those companies and they put them together in a basket of funds, whether it's an ETF or a mutual fund, and they say here's your largest 500 companies. And what happens is that they put them together, let's say July 1st, and they don't really touch them. So they're very low cost because there's not a lot of active management in them. And then the next July 1st rolls around and they go through and say what isn't in the 500 anymore, what is, and they make those changes. So you're doing more of a passive strategy a lot of times when you're doing index funds. That's why people call it indexing a lot of times. There's not a lot of active management that happens in these funds, not a lot of cost usually associated with them, but you are just kind of holding companies for a certain period of time, and you're not technically holding the S&P 500 a lot of the times because companies change in terms of how big they are, and some of them fall out and some new ones come in, and you're not always having those companies in your fund because they only change them once a year, but eventually you will. The next one is probably the one that everybody knows about, is target date funds. Now, I did a big video on this a couple of months ago, I think. So you can go to our YouTube channel. I'll show you a link in a little bit on how to go to that. But you're probably there if you're watching this and essentially see more about target date funds. But target date funds are typically what the companies will utilize for people to, have their money placed in if you don't make a choice. It's kind of the default allocation that's used. And what a target date fund is basically you'll see, blah, 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 target date, and then they'll have a year. So like, let's say 2030. 2030 is supposed to be the year closest to your age 65, which is retirement, right? So essentially what these funds are supposed to do is they are more aggressive as you're farther away from that 2030 or whatever year that is, it's closest to your age 65, and it's supposed to get more and more conservative and more bonds, less stocks in the portfolio as you get closer to that date. A couple of things just to kind of keep in mind is they can be kind of expensive. There are some that aren't, and there are some that are. So you want to take a look at that. B is that they're not always as conservative as people think. People think that by the time they get to, let's say, 2030 as our example, you're going to be 80% in bonds. And that's not always the case. I've seen some of them go to maybe 40%. Doesn't mean that they don't exist out there. I just have not personally seen one that has gone really, really conservative. So just keep that in mind if you're getting closer to retirement and you're really worried about holding too many stocks. Maybe the target date fund isn't the best way to go at that point. So it just depends on your situation. The next kind of fund that we're going to talk about is bond funds. Bond funds are basically, bond is debt on a company, government debt. And essentially what they're doing is they're taking a bunch of different debt, most of the time corporate, but sometimes there are some, state or local or federal debt in there as well. And they're putting them together in a fund. So you're holding lots of different debt on different companies together in a bond fund, like I said, ETF or mutual funds. And bond funds are seen as more stable. They're considered to be fixed income sometimes, things like that. But keep in mind, bonds do move up and down. We saw in 2022 that bonds can be very volatile and people don't realize that. So just because you're in bonds doesn't mean you're in just the safest thing and there's no way to lose money. That's not true. You also want to take a look at the duration of a bond. So how long is the bond being held? And typically when they put them in these bond funds, they will match them all together. So you'll see short term, long term, intermediate duration of bonds. And usually the ones that are shorter term have less volatility than the ones that are long term. Long term are usually 30 years, or so. I would say 20 to 30 years probably. And so essentially you want to kind of have an understanding of how those bond funds work. But bonds are available to you if you want to have something that's not equity, that's a little bit more easygoing, a little safer than stocks are. So that basically will move us into the next kind of fund, which is stock funds. Stock funds are stock of companies, right? And so the funds are holding lots of different companies and their stock for you to have in there. So you might have Apple, Tesla, you might have lots of different things in there. The thing to keep in mind with stock funds is when you're looking at the name of the stock fund, it typically they're usually the fund has a purpose or has like a I don't know how to I don't know what the word I'm trying to get to, but has a theme. Let's put it that way, a theme. And so like it might be emerging markets. So everything in that fund is going to be an emerging market company. So emerging markets typically are up and coming international countries. So like let's say Vietnam, right? Vietnam is considered an emerging market. And so this emerging market fund might have some Vietnam companies in there, might have some Chinese companies in there, might have some, Argentinian companies in there, whatever is considered to be emerging markets at that time. And so you will look at the title and go, okay, these are the type of companies that are in here. They also can make them so that they're large, medium, or small. So small cap, mid cap, and large cap. That is kind of another way that people will group them so that it makes it easier for you to know what the manager is buying in that fund to give you a little bit more idea. Again, as we know, stocks can go up and down. They definitely can be volatile, as we've seen the last couple of years. So just keep in mind of diversifying when you do that. And, if you buy all of the large cap funds in there, you're probably not as diversified as if you buy a large, medium, and small. So just keep that in mind if you're looking to diversify in your 401k. The last, but certainly not the least, is cash. There are cash alternatives in 401ks. Typically, they're usually seen as money market funds. A couple things to look at for money market funds is how expensive are they? What is their expense ratio? Essentially, because they do typically have an expense ratio. You're not just sitting in cash and not paying anything. So you want to make sure you understand that before you put everything in cash because you're worried about the markets or whatever, whatever you're utilizing the cash portion for. A lot of people ask, should they have cash in their 401k? And, typically the 401k is not something that you're going to like grab money out of. It's not like your savings account or maybe a brokerage account you have. It's not something that you necessarily go to first to take money from. So a lot of people don't have a lot of cash in their 401k, and that's okay as long as you have liquidity someplace else that you can get to. So, in conclusion, be an active player in your 401k. I said this last month, but it's worth repeating. Investments in your 401k do change. And if you're not looking at your 401k, let's say on a quarterly basis, you might miss an opportunity of a fund you've been waiting for a while and, buy it a little later than you actually wanted to. So just kind of keep looking at things. Investing has a lot of combinations. People have bonds, people have stock. They don't quite know how to work them. And so a lot of times they can be beneficial to run a financial plan to see how your 401k should be allocated, how much risk you need to take. And when you know how much risk you need to take, you can decide how much risk you want to take, right? And we have lots of other videos, like I talked about the target date fund video. So if you wanted to go check that out, you just go to our YouTube channel there. And if you did want to have a more private conversation about your 401k or about any of your financial situation, we're happy to talk about that. You can either use the QR code, basically open up your camera app, put it over the QR code, and it should come up. Sometimes you get a little bit of a problem, so just make sure it's you're using the zoom in and out to get to that. Or you can go to our website at onevisionretire.com, email us at info@onevisionretire.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you just kind of want to check in and see what's happening, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. And with that, we are going to end September. Hopefully, you learned a little bit about the investments in your 401k. And we're starting to end the year out strong, hopefully, so that you're taking a look at what you're investing in your 401k, not just how much you're investing. All right, so from here at One Vision Retirement, we want to make sure that your retirement is in 2020 vision.